Hey everybody, Sean from SP Productions here, and today we're going to be digging into the Tomenosuke Blade Runner blaster build. Let's see what's included in the instructions. So you get the actual instruction manual, get a Blade Runner blaster photo book. So for those who saw my background video on the history of the Blade Runner blaster, I referenced the Worldcon photos that Carl Tate, you see he's credited here, took when the blaster kind of popped back on the radar at Worldcon. The folks at Tomenosuke were gracious enough to include some really high quality reference photos of the actual Blade Runner 2049 prop along with the Worldcon blaster, so you have some great reference here. So you can see this is the Worldcon blaster when it popped back up. Some great detailed shots so you can kind of see the different rust spots and pitting if you really want to get crazy with the weathering. The profiles and history auction photos, so some really nice shots here too. And this is perfect because one of the other steps I was going to take was printing out some of the Worldcon photos, but I think I'll just leave those digital for now and I'll reference this photo book going forward. Let's take a look at the manual itself. So as you would expect, the manual is largely written in Japanese. So there's a parts list all in Japanese, and then there's an English version, and then an exploded view of the prop. And as I mentioned in the unboxing video, you can see just the tons and tons of little pins and springs and screws and stuff. So we're gonna have to take some extra precautions to make sure we don't lose anything as we're building this. So what's interesting, you know, if you're curious what's over here in the Japanese part, you can grab any translation app. For me, I use the Google Translate, which is pretty handy because it has a camera function. So you just set it to Japanese to English, you turn on the camera, and then you just point the camera at the text, and it actually does a pretty good job of translating the text into English. And what's really important here, I think, is the text on the left side of the manual talks about how to prepare and blue some of the metal parts, which we're going to be doing in an upcoming video. That's a handy little reference tool there. And then diving into the actual instructions, they continue the model of having the instructions written in Japanese and English and showing you what parts to kind of put where. And then on the back, there are some detailed instructions and suggestions on how to prep and blue the parts, or in this case, they actually used aluminum black. We're going to be following some of this as we dig in here. So just thinking ahead about how I would approach a project like this, since the instruction manual, it's assuming that everything's already prepped, blued, and painted. So I think step one is we're gonna prep all the metal parts. Step two is we're gonna blue the parts that need bluing. So referencing this photo from the photo book, the Steyr receiver top you can see is largely blued along with the bolt handle. Looks like there's some bluing on the trigger and the trigger guards. So after we blue those parts, there's a couple parts that need to be painted black. There's this cover on the right hand side, and similarly there's a cover on the left-hand side that goes over the cylinder. And then I think from there we can probably dig into the actual assembly, and then when everything's put together, we can kind of go back over everything and start applying some weathering effects. Got this pile of parts will be the parts that I will be bluing. This little sliver of parts, I'm not sure if they're gonna get blued, painted, or what. And then these parts over here all have to get painted black. To try to take some of the imperfections out of the metal is maybe hit these with some sandpaper. We'll start with a more coarse grit and kind of work our way up to something a little bit finer just to make sure we get a nice smooth finish when we're done. So spent the last hour and a half or so going over all the parts. Hit them with 800 grit sandpaper, and for some of the higher rough spots, like some of the seams in between, you can see some of the casting lines, hit that with some 400 grit, and then went back over it with 800 grit. So now I'm gonna dunk all the parts in some water just to get the sanding schmutz off of there, and then I'm gonna hit them with 1000 grit, and hopefully they'll be prepped and ready to go for painting and bluing. So let's get you. Okay, so next up, I'm going to hit everything with some 1000 grit. Dunk them again in the bath to rinse all the little particulate off, and then let them dry overnight. So here we go. Why don't we do the time lapse? Okay, so now I got all the parts hit with 1000 grit paper. I'm gonna dunk them back in the tub of water just to get all the stuff off. Kind of just pat them dry. So I got a little paintbrush here that I'm just going to use to go over the parts while they're under the water, just to kind of get all the stuff out of all the nooks and crannies. Can never have enough towels in your workshop. So I'm just going to pat these dry. Let them air dry overnight. And I think tomorrow we'll probably hit them with some steel wool, just to kind of just really polish up that finish, maybe some polishing compound. And then from there they should be ready for painting and bluing. Cool. So I think that's going to be it for today. We'll be back tomorrow to get these polished up.